Hello and welcome to Mel Makes Stuff. My name is Melissa and this is my March 2021 podcast. I'm in the middle of a 3-week-long vacation from work and I feel so refreshed. I cannot even express it in words, but probably you can see it in my face. I feel like I no longer look like the Crypt Keeper, which is awesome. I'm excited to share what I've been doing. I have one finished object, sort of another one if we're going to count spinning, a couple things in progress, and then I want to talk about my upcoming plans because I have been putting a lot of thought into planning out what I'm going to do over the next year, or at least over the next couple months, and so I want to show you some of that stuff. I did finally finish the Wednesday sweater by PetiteKnit. So if you've seen my earlier monthly podcast, you'll know that I was planning to turn this into a dress, and I did end up doing that. I wanted to use up the yarn that I had for this project, which was the Piece Fleece Worsted weight. I think I had 8 skeins of this to start with, and I only ended up using 7. I could have kept going, but then it would have actually been ankle length on me, and that's like a little bit too ridiculous. I'll put in some footage of me wearing it while I talk about it because it's like far too big to fit in the frame if I were to show it to you. It seems like I finished this a long time ago, but I'm fairly sure I knit this exactly to pattern other than the length. It is knit top down, so when I got to the point where I was supposed to do the split hem, which is, it's not a cropped sweater exactly, it's sort of a mid-length as written, and I just kept going. I didn't do additional increases, I didn't do anything special. I just kept knitting a giant tube for as long as my yarn would hold out. And then I had gotten partway into my 7th skein of the 8 that I had, and I wasn't sure how much yarn I was going to need for the rib at the bottom because I did want to do a split hem like in the original pattern. At that point, I wasn't sure if I was going to make it longer, the actual ribbing itself, if I was going to lengthen that at all. I don't think I did. I think I did it about as written in the pattern, but I sort of eyeballed it based on what was going to look okay on my body. When I was done with the whole thing, I was like, how in God's name am I going to block this? Like, it's giant. The Piece Fleece does have spinning oil in it. Like, I can tell that it's just got a little bit of spinning oil. It's nothing really out of the ordinary for like a yarn of this type, but I didn't want to just not block it. Like, I definitely wanted to soak it to sort of get that oil smell. It was mostly about the smell. Like, I wanted it to smell like wool and not wool plus machine oil. So I knew I was going to have to block it. So I was like, okay, I'll just gear up for this thing and it'll be drying for 4 months, probably. I went ahead and soaked it in a tub with wool wash as I usually would. And then I got a brilliant idea as I was trying to sort of gingerly take this giant dress out of the wet water in the tub and wring it out as gently as I could. I look over and I see my washing machine sitting right next to me. And I was like, I bet there's a spin only cycle on that washing machine. And sure enough, there is. And let me tell you, it is an absolute game changer if you have this feature on your washing machine. So I drag this tub half full of water and this giant sopping wet sweater, and I managed to get it into the washing machine. And I was able to turn the spin function, so no additional water, no agitation whatsoever, just spin cycle all the way on high. I stood there and watched it. It was about a 10-minute cycle. And sure enough, it spun the vast majority of the water out, and I was able to just pick it up and lay it out, and it dried in probably 2 days, which is really good. If I had tried to block this in a traditional way, like just soak it, get as much of the water out with towels as I could, and then laid it out to dry, no exaggeration, it probably would have taken about a week to dry. And at that point, it's like, I can't keep the cats off of this thing for an entire week. I can't guarantee that it's not going to start molding, in that amount of time. So this, using the washing machine to get the water out, I've now done this with 3 other projects, and I think it's going to make me not dread blocking anymore. Like, I just don't like the act of trying to get all that water out and like getting all these sopping wet towels everywhere, and I just don't love it. So if you're gonna try this out, I would make absolutely certain that your washing machine is just doing a spin, it's not adding additional water, it's not agitating at all, and turn the spin function as high as it will go. The force of the washer spinning at that highest speed will push the garment up against the side of the washing machine and it won't move at all. So it's not going to be agitated. And that's why I stood there and watched it, because if I had seen any sort of agitation happening, I would have turned it off and just gone the regular route. One close-up I will show you is how beautifully this fabric turned out. It has, so this is a combo of the piece fleece and a singles yarn that is a yak merino silk singles that I held together, and it has this beautiful halo. And I have honestly no idea what's causing that. I think it's the piece fleece mostly. I don't think it's this singles yarn, and I love the way it turned out. It's like it's a very solid fabric. It's definitely something that I'm going to be wearing in the dead of winter inside my house. That's exactly what I intended this for, so. I just want to quickly show you my latest finished spinning project because it's technically an FO. This is 568 yards of some Targhee that I spun on my wheel, which is a Kromsky Sonata, and it's a 2-ply. The fiber was dyed by Created by Elsie B. She has absolutely beautiful fiber. I can't remember if she sells on Etsy or if she has her own website, but I will link it below. This colorway is called Apple Picking, and I thought that that was a perfect first yarn to spin in my new house because I live now basically in the middle of a bunch of apple orchards and also next to a vineyard. This is sort of an area that's really known for apple picking, so it seemed apropos. I wound it off into these 2 skeins. When I was plying it, I couldn't fit both of these onto one bobbin. The Targhee is a really poofy breed of wool. It's very bouncy, and so all of this would not fit on one bobbin as it was being plied. I basically just didn't want to have a knot in the middle of this big skein that I would be knitting long and like forget that there were really 2 skeins put together. So I'm not sure what I'm going to use this for. I'm not entirely sure that I did the fiber justice. The original fiber had a lot of teal in it, which has sort of gotten lost because I think I stripped it down a little bit too much. You can sort of see it here and there, but I spun this in sort of a fractal, meaning, so when I unbraided the fiber, I stripped it lengthwise all the way down into separate lengths, and then I spun one just end to end, and then the other one I split up into probably 7 or 8 other long strips, and I think that was just a little bit too much. Like I would have been better off maybe splitting it twice, and then the colors would be less blended together than they are now. The problem with splitting the one ply essentially too many times is that the colors can sort of get a bit muddy, and I don't think this is totally muddy, but I do think I'm going to have a hard time finding the appropriate project for it because a lot of these colors are very soft in here, like the ones that have a lot of green and brown. And then there are these pops of like hot pink. And I think that looks really cool in the skein, but it might not necessarily look cool knitted up. So I'm going to have to think long and hard about what sort of project's going to be appropriate for this. Maybe something striped with a neutral yarn would be nice, but we'll see. For works in progress, my Sterntaucher cardigan by Kate Davies is almost done. I'm going to also insert some footage of that here because it similarly is too big to fit in the frame right now. I finished all of the knitting except for the tops of the pockets, like closing those off, and I have blocked it. Again, using the washing machine to spin all the water out, which was a godsend again. Of course, now I've stopped because I'm trying to figure out what to do with the pockets and I don't know what I'm doing. So of course it's a good time to like drop the project. What I've settled on doing is to create 2 fabric pockets that are going to go on the inside of this sweater. The pattern wants you to create knitted pocket linings, basically just one piece of fabric that sits on the inside of the color work to create the pocket. You sew it down and it creates just the pocket back essentially. For a variety of reasons, I've decided not to do that. I don't want to create additional bulk. I want to cover up the long floats that are on the inside of the work so that I don't get like my hand caught in them when I'm putting my hand in the pocket. And I also just sort of want to try this fabric pocket idea because I have heard of other people doing it, although I'm having a hard time finding any of those materials where I've like seen this done before. At this point, I feel like this is sort of a common sense thing I should be able to do. I'm planning to go in my stash and just find some quilting cotton or some other like sturdy cotton fabric and cut 4 rectangles, so 2 for each pocket, that are the dimensions of that original pocket lining that I was supposed to knit according to the pattern. And then I'm just going to sew them in by hand, likely. I mean, I'll sew the edges of the rectangle together so that the pocket is complete. And then I'll sew that pocket square into the garment by hand. The tricky thing I think is going to be what exactly it will do at the top of the pocket. Like I'm going to have to finish off the top of the fabric pocket in some way and then sew that in so that it's not visible from the outside of the garment. And that I think is what's holding me up right now because I can't exactly visualize how that's going to work. And I think what I'm going to have to do is just go ahead and try it and see what happens and then just fudge it at that point if I need to. So I just want to give you a little close-up of the color work. I'm really happy with how this blocked out. It's really even. And I am experienced enough in knitting color work that I was relatively sure it was going to be okay, but I am not used to having super long floats like this on the back of the work. Like this is not something I would ordinarily do. I would usually catch these floats so that they would, I know, lay flat and the tension would be right. But the pattern suggests that you not do that. I'm assuming because the yarn is too bulky and you might see it on the front, like if you catch the floats too many times. And so I have to say, I think that was the right thing to do. It does look very nice and even. And there is a good amount of halo on this too. That natural yarn that's used as the background of this color work is a 100% Cotswold yarn. And I think that is what is causing this halo. It's not the softest yarn in the world because Cotswold is a long wool, like the actual fibers as they come off the sheep are rather long and curly, which is interesting. And it made this very interesting yarn. This navy here is Cotswold as well from the same producer. And I really like how that turned out. Like it's just got a very pleasant halo in that colorwork section. And then the main yarn for the body is also some relatively local farm yarn, and it poofed just a little bit. This had a good amount of spinning oil in it as well, so once I soaked it and then ran it through the spin cycle on the washing machine, it poofed and sort of bloomed, as people like to say, nicely. So this will be done by the next time I see you. For my Sawyer pullover by Sari Nordlund, I finished the body actually, and so that is blocking right now and it's wet, so I didn't want to pick it up off of the blocking mats. I had sort of an adventure throughout the knitting of that body and the blocking of it because it was looking, so I'm knitting the 3rd size, which I think is like a 43, 44 inch bust. My actual measurement is like a 35, 36. So I wanted it to have a little bit of ease because I generally need more ease to fit over my shoulders, which are broad for my bust size. I've talked about this before. As I was knitting the body of this sweater, it was looking really small, like long and skinny, like a long skinny tube. And I was like, oh, I don't know if this is gonna fit me. It felt like I was emotionally losing steam. Like I was still working on it, but I was so unsure about whether it would block out to the measurements that I needed. I mean, it was really measuring like maybe a 33 inch bust, 34 inch bust, and I'm not wearing a mohair sweater with negative ease. Like that's not a thing I'm gonna do. Like nobody needs mohair all up in their pits. I had finished the body, which is knit in the round from the bottom up. You split, you do the front and back separately, do some short rows, seam using a 3 needle bind off at the shoulder. And then at the end, you would pick up around the neckline, knit some rib, fold it under, and then sew to the inside of where you picked the stitches up for the neckline originally. I decided to do that first. I like to do that before I put the sleeves on because I find that having a neckline on the sweater can really change the way that your sleeves end up fitting in terms of the length. If the neckline of the sweater is really open without having that folded over neckline completed and you put your sleeves on and then you measure your sleeve length based on the fit of how that sweater is fitting you without the neckline done. When you go to do the neckline and it pulls the sweater a little bit tighter, a little bit closer to your neck, your sleeves are going to be too short. I often like to make my sleeves like bracelet length anyway, but for a mohair sweater, I wanted the sleeves to be full length because mohair is really warm and I'm probably not going to have much use for a mohair sweater if the sleeves are too short. All that to say, I had done the neckline before blocking the body, and I went ahead and blocked the body now because I wanted to make sure that it would block out before I go ahead with the sleeves. Like, if this really was not going to fit me, I probably still would have finished it and like given it to a smaller friend, but I just wanted to know, you know, I didn't want to continue on and not know what was going to happen. So I put it in my tub of water with the soak, let it be for a couple hours probably. I think I might have forgotten about it. So I came back, and because I knew that I really wanted to stretch it widthwise, I did not do a whole lot of wringing out before I pulled it out of the water. So I actually put one arm in the bottom of the sweater and one arm in the neckline and sort of lifted it up out of the water like that. And then I squished the water out as much as I could. And then I carried it over to my blocking mats like that. So I really stretched this thing. I let the weight of itself, the weight of the wet wool of the body of the sweater stretch itself out. And then I laid it out, and I didn't actually end up needing to pin it at all, and it blocked perfectly out to the 44-inch bust that I needed. It was like magic. I had done a swatch. I was relatively confident that it would block out because the main yarn that I'm using is a superwash. This is a superwash tweed yarn, undyed, and the mohair I'm using is Knitting for Olive in the Plum Clay colorway. I know from experience that a mohair, you know, garment where mohair is being stranded with another yarn, the garment is going to tend to behave like whatever that base yarn is, the one that the mohair is being stranded with. So I figured it would stretch to some degree, but I was just relieved to know that it actually did stretch out to the measurement that I needed. And that gave me a little bit of renewed vigor for doing the sleeves, which are also, as you can see, knit from the bottom up. There's a good amount of rib. I think that's about 3.5 inches, maybe 3 3/4. And then there is mostly moss stitch, so the back of the sleeve, and on either side of this cable panel, mostly moss stitch. And then these cables are an echo of the cables that are on the front and back of the sweater. And just to show a close-up, these cables look relatively complicated. It's really easy to read them. You know, people talk about reading your knitting all the time. What I think about when I think about reading my knitting is, especially in cables, like, what is that cable supposed to be doing, right? Like, what's the overall formation of that cable? So just on this sleeve, there are 3 cables here, right? There's this one here, this one in the center, and this one. And these 2 on the outsides are just mirror images of each other. And so when I look at this one cable, I can see that there is this little, so these are 2 twisted stitches with a purl stitch in between that are creating this one that sort of sits on top. And then behind that, there's a plain, there's, the back part of the cable is sort of just plain knit stitches. And so you know when your cable cross is coming up because you have it on your chart. But you don't need to worry exactly about what those stitches are going to do because you know that this one always sits on top of the one beneath it. It's never going to go to the back of this plain knitted cable. It's always going to sit on top of it. So that's sort of how I think about that one. And then this one in the center is really beautiful. It's hard to see with the mohair yarn. You have these bobbles that sort of sit in the middle of these 2 little cables, and then the 2 cables come together and cross each other in between each bobble section. And in the bobble section, and I just find this really beautiful, you can see the cable goes out and in and out and in, and it's just so, it's like such a little detail, but it's so pretty. I'm feeling pretty zen about this sweater now. It's like I really am enjoying the process of knitting it, and I don't usually feel that way by the time it gets to the sleeves. Sorry about the sigh. Look at this dog. That is my little doggo sleeping in a cat bed. She does these dramatic sighs. That's Greta. She's a pit bull. She's super cute. I love all of her dramatic sighing when she is dreaming. doggy dreams. She doesn't like being outside the room when I'm podcasting, so here she is. I've been thinking a lot about the process of making things lately and really wanting to not feel the pressure to constantly be finishing and, you know, being ready for the project to be done so that I can move on to the next thing. I think there's always going to be an element of that. I mean, that's sort of part of life and part of like long-term making of one thing. Like at some point you're ready for it to be done and you want to start something new, and there are so many beautiful things out there that I want to do. But with this project, there's enough interest and complexity in the cable patterns, and I do have to actually pay attention to this just because I'm using 2 strands of yarn, like making sure that all of the mohair is getting caught appropriately when I'm crossing these cables and things like that. I really have to be looking at it. It's weird because ordinarily I would find something like this pretty tedious at this point, but I'm really just enjoying it more and more. It's not the type of enjoyment where I would immediately turn around and make another one, but it did sort of get me thinking that I maybe need to focus on more complex projects to get this sort of continuous fulfillment throughout the course of the project. There have been a couple times lately where I have needed something simple for a Zoom meeting or whatever, but most of the time I don't. You know, most of the time I'm knitting sort of on my own, like listening to a podcast or something like that. And it's okay for the project to be more complex, and it's okay for me to have to take the time to really study the chart or to pay attention to what I'm doing. I think I might just be in that sort of mental place right now, and so that sort of got me thinking about my upcoming plans for things that I do want to make next and being really thoughtful about what those things are. So with that said, let me segue into showing you my Make 9. March is a little bit late in the year, I think, to be doing a Make 9. You know, most people will do them like in January or like late December for the next year. I'm sure you're familiar with it, but if you're not, you know, the idea is that you pick 9 things that you're going to make over the next year. And most people will usually pick like 9 specific patterns or something like that. I find that to be really restrictive. Like it's basically like as soon as I create those 9 patterns, I change my mind about one or all of them. And then I feel irritated with myself and also irritated with my Make 9 grid. Like I don't want to follow it. I have tons of structure in my work life. And so I think outside of work, I just want no structure and do what I feel the vast majority of the time. So I decided to take a little bit different approach with my Make 9 this year because I've never really been able to choose 9 things and just stick to them. I change my mind all the time, and I think that's okay. Instead of choosing 9 patterns, I chose 9 sort of ideas for things that I want to do. So I want to try out a new technique that I've never done before. I want to, making a crochet garment, I've done that a couple times, but I'd like to continue to progress and get better at doing crochet garments. So choosing a crochet garment, doing another sweater with all over color work, using a special yarn. So, you know, a yarn that I've been saving in my stash for that special project that, you know, I could die without ever having used that yarn, and that's just stupid. So I did a little bit of swatching, and I want to show that to you now. Back when Game of Thrones was on and my husband and I were watching it, like this would be sitting up, you know, on a shelf in my craft room, and I'd be like, it's my sigil. Like all of these swatches on a board. Dorkiest sigil ever. So this one here is my crochet swatch for a garment out of Interweave Crochet. I believe it's summer 2018, but I'll put a picture on the screen. I find getting gauge and crochet to be extremely hard. Part of the reason I think is because the way that the crochet stitches are formed, there are just a lot of variables in how tight you're tensioning the yarn in your left hand. But like if you're doing a double crochet in US crochet terms, there are a number of points where like you have to wrap the yarn a certain amount of times, pull it through, how tightly you pull the yarn or tension the yarn during that first pull through, and then how tightly you tension the yarn through that second pull through. There are so many variations in there that are really hard to regulate because all of that is happening with your own hands. It's not the same as a knitting needle, which for the most part will get you your gauge. Like there is, your personal tension obviously does have a lot to do with it, but there are just more variables in forming the crochet stitch, in my opinion. So I have a hard time getting crochet gauge, and this is also a much smaller yarn than I have ever used for crochet. It's actually a thread, which I know is typical for crocheters. Like if there are any experienced crocheters, you're like, this is not a big deal. But for me, this is a big deal. So this is a cotton thread from Knit Picks. Black, of course, because I like to torture myself with black yarn. It might be a little bit difficult to see, but I was definitely not getting gauge down here. And I could see that because I was measuring as I went along. And so up here, I just periodically tightened my stitches a little bit more. By the time I got to this section, I was getting gauge. So the trick is just going to be remembering what I was doing with my left hand to tension the yarn during this time where I was getting the good gauge on the swatch. It's just so much muscle memory. I think it's, you know, this is one of the reasons that I want to keep making crochet garments so that I can regulate that a little bit better in the future. So this should be interesting. The pattern that I picked is relatively forgiving, I think, in that there's only a pattern in the yoke. And then once I get to the body, it's sort of like I can just do whatever with my gauge, really. Like if it is a little bit bigger than intended, which is the case, like my tendency is to crochet a little bit more loosely than I should be. So if that happens on the body, it's not the end of the world. It's a top-down garment, so fingers crossed that that will go well. I also am probably only going to be able to work on it during the day because I can't see the stitches. With crochet, I have a hard time like knowing where to put the hook in the first place, and then if I can't see it, it's just like, why am I doing this to myself? Hopefully with the summer coming, this will be like a nice pleasant thing to work on while I sit outside and the dog scampers in the yard. One of the other things on my Make 9 is to make a Helga Isager pattern, which is something I've been wanting to do for a long time. I have really admired her designs for many years, and I've always sort of been scared off of making them because literally all of the comments in Ravelry are like, this is so poorly written and blah blah blah, like people going crazy about how bad the patterns are and mistakes in them and blah blah blah. But the design is so nice, like the design aesthetic I find really appealing, that I think I'm going to give it a go. So I'm dipping a toe into it by using a pattern that is by Helga Isager, but it was published in one of the making magazines. With it not being published by her own company, you know, there were another set of eyes on this. I feel like there might be a better chance of the pattern being well written. There aren't too many projects on Ravelry, but that's okay. I'm just going to go for it. And it is the Mariposa cardigan. I think it's called the Mariposa cardigan or Mariposa jacket. And it was in the desert issue of Making Magazine, which is beautiful. I basically want to make every single thing that's in that magazine. The original pattern uses, I assume, some Isager yarns. I don't have the pattern book in front of me. It uses I think it uses a cotton linen blend held together with a mohair. And I didn't intend for this to turn into like the mohair podcast, but apparently it is. It's funny because I didn't really come to using mohair until like 1,000 years after everybody else started doing it. It takes me forever to pick up on trends, so I guess here we are now. So with this pattern, which I will hopefully have a photo up on the screen at this point, there are these very interesting cone-shaped or bell-shaped, really 3D stitch pattern formations on the front of this cardigan. And then the sleeves and I think the back are knit in a twisted rib, like a 3x1 twisted rib. With the original base yarn being a cotton linen, that fabric is going to have a lot of drape. It's going to behave like that linen yarn. So this is the combo that I am planning to use. I'm getting the exact gauge that I need. And as you can see, this is a Bizarro yarn combo. So these are the two yarns that I'm planning to hold together. And I really don't know exactly how I got this in my head. Actually, you know what? That's not true. They're in the same magazine. There's a pair of mittens that have a lot of, it's another, you know, you hold a base yarn with a mohair and there's a bunch of embroidery on the back of the hand. And I was looking at Ravelry projects of those just to see the types of yarns that people were using and that sort of thing. And I saw a project that I think had a rust colored base yarn and a green mohair, like a completely different, they were not related colors at all. And it created this very, I mean, it was a bizarre look, but there was something about it that was really appealing too. So this instantly popped into my head. I had this in my stash from a failed test knit that was just being run horribly. So this is a linen and mulberry silk combo, and I had never used this yarn before. And this is Shibui Koan in the blueprint colorway. And this color is really not something I would ordinarily go for. Like, it's a little bit too painter's tape blue for me. So when I was thinking about those mittens and thinking about combining it with like another color that was just not similar, instantly sort of like a rust color popped into my head. This is the Knitting for Olive, again, silk mohair in the Dusty Robin colorway. So pairing yarns that are this sort of weird together is going to create a really statement piece. I think that this is going to work for my wardrobe for a number of reasons. I usually wear a lot of neutrals, just my wardrobe is full of neutral pants and tops and dresses. And I think something like this weird color combo is going to look really good over like a natural colored linen jumpsuit or something like that. Like, it's not going to be something that I can wear multiple times a week without people noticing, for sure. But I think because the pattern itself is also a statement piece, like with those weird 3D stitch pattern cones on the front, it's just going to be sort of a look. I'm excited about that. I think that will be cool because I don't have too many cardigans that are like that. Like, most of what I have is relatively wearable in a work situation or, you know, a day-to-day situation. Not to say that this isn't, but I like the idea of getting a couple very special pieces for my wardrobe. It's just sort of something that I am looking forward to. The final thing that I want to show you today is the special yarn that I'm planning to use to fulfill that Make 9 box. And it is this right here. I was going back and forth on whether to use this brown, dark brown, or this Moorit colorway, and I'm gonna go with the Moorit. So this is some Fox Hill Farm Cormo in the Moorit colorway. It's a fingering weight yarn. So this is a naturally colored Cormo, which is beautiful. Fox Hill Farm is in Western Massachusetts, and it is really hard to get this stuff. They don't have a website. They don't appear to sell online anywhere that I can find. And actually, really, this farmer is living my best life because the only way that I can really find to reach them is by sending a letter to a P.O. box, which I love. If that was like the way that I could be contacted, that would be just perfect. I've never knit with the fingering weight version of this yarn before, but I have knit with the DK weight, and it is incredible. It's the softest yarn that I have ever used. It's so delightful to wear. It's my favorite sweater to wear. It was a sweater I was wearing in last month's podcast, which of course I didn't say anything about at the time. It was the Fold Lines sweater by Nordlund, and it was in the silver, natural silver colorway of this Cormo yarn. I got this at Rhinebeck 2 years ago, 2019, and I have been just hoarding it since then. I have 4 skeins of this. I've been looking for the perfect project, and it was one of those yarns that I was just saving. Like, I really needed to find the perfect project for it. So I think the one that I'm going to do is the Fleuriste cardigan by Sari Nordlund. Same designer as the Sawyer sweater, same type of deal, like some relatively complicated looking cables at the top. It is, I believe, a bottom-up sweater again. It's a cardigan. Here are the buttons I'm planning to use. So this is a black mother of pearl vintage button, and I have a ton of these because I knew that they would go with a lot of my naturally colored yarns. And so that is the plan for the Fleuriste cardigan. I'm really excited about it. I need to pace myself here. Like, I don't want to cast on all 3 of these new projects all at once. I'm really liking, right now I pretty much only have 1 sweater on the needles, which is the Sawyer pullover, and I'm really liking the way that feels. Like, I feel very calm about what I have going on. I don't feel overwhelmed by the amount of projects, and I think I would like to keep that going. The swatching does help with that feeling. Like, when I get the cast-on-itis and I feel just the urge to start casting on, you know, everything, I swatch. That gives me a little bit of a break from my current project. It sort of triggers that like happy dopamine feeling in my brain, getting to play with a new yarn and still feel like I'm doing something productive, because I do need to swatch. I do generally swatch for all of my garments. I know I'm going to have to swatch at some point, and so doing it when I am feeling that cast-on-itis is still doing something productive and allowing me to play with that other yarn, but not actually going ahead and starting the new project before I'm ready to have that many projects on the needles. I can't decide what I will do next. I think having one crochet garment going and a knitted garment going is okay. So it's really going to be a toss-up between the cardigan and the Mariposa. I guess the two cardigans, the Fleuriste cardigan and the Mariposa with the silk and mohair held together. I'm really not going to be able to wear either of them until the fall anyway. I think I'll probably start the Mariposa first just because I don't want to be sitting with mohair in my lap in the summer. And then, you know, this is fine. Knitting wool doesn't bother me in the summer, but I think knitting mohair, like my hands, if your hands are sweaty, you basically can't knit with mohair comfortably. So if I can get that one done before it gets really hot here, then I can ease into working on the Fleuriste a little bit later on when the weather's warmer. So that's everything I have for you for today, and I'm interested to know more about how you plan your projects. Do you do a make 9? If you do you pick your patterns out? Do you keep a list? How do you think about planning for your projects? This is something that is just sort of constantly evolving for me, and I'm interested to know what other people do because it's a great opportunity to learn from each other. So if you're enjoying these podcasts, please do subscribe and hit the like button. If nothing else, it encourages me to keep going. So I would appreciate that if you are enjoying the content. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Bye.